Stillborn to Life, a novella by Stevens. Chapter 5. I am 17 years old and standing upon the precipice of a cliff, looking out upon the churning waters below. It would be all too easy, I think to myself as I contemplate surrendering myself to the grim fate of the jagged rocks below. And one often marvels at how so many instead choose life in such states of existential anguish. Thunder growls rapidly throughout the atmosphere like a mad dog as lightning spears the dense anatomy of an ever-darkening sky into two, converging with the rocky terrain over which I hang like a question mark, the lightning answering me fully with each quickening flash. It is times like these that I feel as if I just might have breached the answer to the question of why I stay here, time and again. The storm always brings me home to myself. It is the absence of externally mirroring turmoil and violence which causes unsettling estrangement from myself and all else. For I am what I am, and it is only when I sweetly and softly succumb to this dark unification within myself that I find true peace. Yet I was about to meet someone who would challenge all of this. I met Father Ralph Casperati when I was 17 years old, shortly after my father had met his brutal demise. I was rummaging the gutter for stray coins outside a church one Sunday evening, and Father Ralph approached me. He asked me what I was in need for and invited me to come to Mass later that evening. I figured it couldn't hurt anything and that perhaps I could get something in the way of more lowly motives out of it. Father Ralph served me some beef stew afterwards, and I counted the monies that I had pilfered from the tithing plates. I suppose I could have merely just asked Father Ralph directly for the money, but I had been raised to be quite xenophobic, and one could even say hostile towards those not of my kind. I continued to go to Father Ralph's Mass, if anything, for the food and the monies I could pilfer up until that day when I was 17, standing upon the stormy precipice of my own suicidal contemplation. Although that time was definitely not the first. And as I stood there with all the anguish and hard-won worldly wisdom of a human being much older in soul than the 17 chronological years that I was, I wrestled again to find remorse and absolution for yet another sin committed as of recent. The young woman had Titian hair and a lithe, boyish figure. I had seen her cross my way quite often since she began to attend the church. She always came alone and was rather taciturn, so I found her to be somewhat of a mystery. And like all red-blooded young men, I had a certain beatinous interest in her. She wasn't really desirable in any sort of wanton way, but I was intrigued, nevertheless. When she saw me, however, she tried to avoid me, usually rather discreetly, and yet, at other times, not so graciously. I surmised that she probably just regarded me as the vagrant gypsy boy and street urchin that I was. But one evening, after Mass, she approached me rather haughtily. She claimed that she had seen me stealing from the tithing plates and intended to alert the proper authorities at once. And this, I suppose, was the proverbial whip that broke the lion's back. I knocked the girl unconscious and then dragged her into a vacant alleyway, where I proceeded to strangle her. As she kicked, struggled, and pleaded vehemently with me, I became strangely aroused and tore off her clothing and forced myself upon her. This was not my first experience of the kind, yet it was the first of this perverse kind of erotic variety. After I had emptied myself into her, I knew now what I had to do. She had to be permanently silenced. For you see, we of the new gypsy breed would literally do anything to preserve our freedom. Thus, I asphyxiated the girl until she went completely limp and ran off into the night before my deed was caught. But despite, however, the grand facade might have been so masterfully adorned by me, I was always greatly and sentiently disturbed by my actions. And the tight, visor-like grip never loosened upon my conscience, gradually, with each venal turn, like so many others experience. And yet my inner anguish and dissonance reverberated definitely, nevertheless, for I also carried deep within the hidden but pure heart of an artist and a poet. So it was that day upon that cliff that I made a vow to myself to become an agent of creation instead of destruction. I went to Father Ralph and announced my intentions and hopes to go to art school, where my gifts could best be honed and brought to fruition. And since I, of course, had no way of financing such a venture myself, asked Father Ralph to be my benefactor. But as he himself came from indigent circumstances and indeed had taken a very vow to them, said that he could not help me, but that he might be able to find someone who could. I waited eagerly for his news, as I was determined this time to transcend my depravity and bring some good and beauty into this world. For once I wanted to be the salt and the light of this earth rather than the grit and the dark. And it was merely 2 weeks later that Father Ralph came to me with his news. He said that those he had spoken to did not want to invest in me. This news, however, came only as a slight shock to my soul, as I surely had become all too aware of the stigmatic brand which a new gypsy bore to no end. I hadn't truly expected anything to come of it, yet still my passion superseded my chagrin, and I continued thereafter with more perseverance than before.